I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. This is true oral storytelling. I write every episode myself, and then, like the Scandinavian bards known as skalds, I perform them in one single, flawless take. This is the best episode yet, so feel free to start right here. Afterward, if you want to catch up, you can listen to previous episodes of the podcast for free or buy the prose volumes on Amazon for only $2.99. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 59. Maul unleashed hell upon that steaming, stinking purgatory. The loud, oppressively hot cavern was cast into chaos as one of the workers, one of the slaves, reached out and did the unthinkable. He freed himself. He elevated himself. He unleashed something awful, something monstrous, and he revealed himself as the one true king of flames and ashes. Maul had forged a connection with the Titan, with the heaving, bloated monstrosity, worn down by unimaginable suffering, degraded by its exploitation, and debased by its choice to allow it. Now, no more. Maul, imbued with some primal, awful power, coated in sigils that protected him more than the finest of armors. He had said no more. He had broken free. He had struck down his captors, and he had reached out to elevate the Titan. He had, for the first time, risked something to help another. His motives weren't altruistic. They were far from charitable. Maul hadn't broken the Titan's collar, hadn't released the creature from its bondage because of what they shared. No, Maul didn't rescue the monster from the misery that he recognized in its eyes. No, he saved the creature. He gave it its chance for its horrible retribution, its bloodthirsty revenge, because it was part of the plan. The plan. Patro's plan. The ancient old wizard's plan to empower Maul, and yes, to use him, to use his power, to use his strength, to throw a wrench into Ravena's inner workings, to destroy that corrupt, ever-growing city from the ground up, to not just chip away, but explode the foundations of that city, to send its buildings crashing to the ground, to shatter its ruler's sensational works into rubble, and most importantly, to take that ruler, to take his brother, his twin, Henno, and cast him into the dirt where he belonged, into the filth that had spawned him. That was Patro's plan. To foment chaos, to nurture the destruction that grew out of it, to use that growing flame to fuel an engine of change, and to ride it to where he belonged, to where he deserved to be, to allow that engine to place him where he was meant to be, at the head of Ravena, stomping his boot down upon his brother's throat. That Patro's plan, but Maul's plan was something different. He didn't care who ran Ravena. He didn't care if it was Patro, Henno, or someone else entirely. He didn't care if Ravena even existed the following day. In fact, he'd have happily lit the match that burned that city to the ground. He'd have salted the very earth himself and felt noble, felt justified at sparing the world the heaving, esurient horror that was that ever-growing city-state. No, Maul had a different goal. Maul didn't care who reigned in that squalid border realm. He only cared about who reigned in his home, in his realm, in the realm of men. He cared about who sat upon its dreadful throne, his throne. He needed to leave this place, to leave that border realm, and to do that, he needed, as much as he hated to admit it, as much as it sickened him to think upon, he needed magics, the powerful magics wielded by those ancient wizards. Patro had sent him away before, had cast him across the firmaments, had trapped him in that broken, dying world, so surely he could send the one true king of men back to his rightful domain. But just getting there wasn't enough. No, it wasn't near enough. Because once there, who knew what awaited him? Who knew who or what would stand in his way? Who had usurped his throne in his absence? Who knew who Maul would have to kill in order to take back what was his? So Maul needed to be prepared. He needed weapons, weapons beyond the heavy, brutish fists that he now smashed into the crying, wailing, gurgling faces of the proctors, of those foolish enough to stand in his way, to try and tame a wild beast, to try and recapture a man who knew exactly what his cage would hold. Maul needed his club. He needed that heavy branch, the one torn from the world tree in his escape, the one that had saved him in the roiling underneath, the grim, macabre instrument of death that he lugged across the sundered worlds. He needed a weapon, a true weapon, a weapon of straightforward, savage destruction. He needed his weapon, but in order to get it, he would need another. He would need a stopgap. The Titan roared behind him, bellowed in rage and joy as it used its shrunken, atrophied limbs to rip the tubes from its body, to free itself from the arcane science that Henno used to suck out its essence, to drain it of its power, the power that was then repurposed to fuel that monstrous city's monstrous expansion. Tore the tubes from its belly, tore the tubes from its back, and it cast them aside, showering those below, the workers, the slaves, the proctors, and Maul, coating all of them with that thick white milk and that ghastly green ichor. As the white and the green rained down, as they poured from the sky, the workers, the slaves, and the proctors all scattered, gagging as they became coated in the white, cringing and wailing as that caustic green scalded their skin, boiling it with but a touch. But those that paused, those that took even a brief moment to wipe the white from their eyes, to cleanse themselves of that stinging green, they befell a fate that was far, far worse. As though the Titan was exhausted by its bulk, was slowed by its captivity, though its limbs were weakened from lack of use, they were still more than strong enough. They were quick enough to shoot out, fast enough to catch whomever was in arm's reach, be they workers, slaves, or proctors, strong enough to lift them, squirming, kicking, and screaming, to raise them into the sky, and they were sinister enough, they were hungry enough to force them all into its gaping maw, to shovel every last one into the monster's gnashing jaws. But as the proctors scattered, as they scrambled and panicked, as they fell to the ground, crawled, tried to stand back up, failed, and found themselves flung into a maelstrom of teeth, they didn't notice that another danger advanced upon them. They didn't notice that another monster stalked among them, a muscled, grinning brute, his tanned skin branded with woad blue and stained with blood red. pitiable proctor, one who had started with nothing, one who had been born into debt, who had slaved night and day to pull himself up, to elevate himself. He looked up, and he could have sworn that the runes, the dread sigils emblazoned upon Maul's skin, could have sworn that they glowed, that they pulsed with some terrible, eldritch energy. But that could have just as easily been that final flash of light, the glowing, slowly dimming aura that always accompanied a trip into the inky black void of nothingness. Maul rolled the proctor over with his foot. He did it roughly, quickly, because time was of the essence. He kicked the proctor, and he laughed as his head lolled sickeningly to the side on a neck bent in too many places. Maul had his plan, and Patro had his, but the two overlapped, not completely, but enough that Maul had to adhere to Patro's time frame, to adhere to his schedule, to obey his commands. But not for long. Not for long. Maul needed a weapon, but the proctor, the one he had struck down, he wielded a blade, a thin, razor-sharp blade, puny and effeminate. A weapon too thin to be effective. A weapon that required too much forethought, too much planning, too much dexterity and patience to be of any use to Maul. No. Faced with that shameful instrument, Maul would rather content himself with the two weapons he always carried. Two weapons that had brought death so effectively to the proctor at his feet, with nary an objection from that thin, useless sword. No, Maul needed something brutal and something devastating. Something he could wield, not in scientific dissection of his enemies, but in anger, in rage, in fury, in an expression of the raw power that flowed from his woad blue tattoos into his very soul. The power that only, finally, found release in death, not in Maul's own, but in that meted out by that fearless, vengeance-fueled destroyer. No, Maul needed something artless, something base, something savage. And soon enough, he saw it. A spear, a simple shaft of wood with what looked like a stone head, but not stone. Something else, something black and shiny, something with red veins running through it, arterial connections that seemed to glimmer in the heat, in the flame, and in the utter death and destruction that had never felt more palpable in a place that was built upon and powered by death, a holy temple consecrated to suffering. It was a spear. It was a mighty spear, a fearsome spear, and Maul's cold, hateful heart filled with joy when he saw who held it. A bizarrely built man, too muscular to be a mere mortal, one covered in striking scarlet skin, one who subjected that entire cavern to his rictus grin, shining and glowing underneath those gnarled, wicked antlers. Maul knew exactly who it was and exactly what he must do. That monster, that abyssal beast hadn't seen him. Not yet. So once again, time was of the essence. Maul lowered himself into a crouch, feeling his thick, heavy thighs tense like those of a panther, and he bounded across the cavern, dodging and weaving instinctively, allowing his peripheral vision and his feral instincts to guide him, to keep him safe from harm, as he kept his eyes locked on one thing, on one fell goal. That abyssal beast didn't see him. Not yet. Because he was too busy enjoying himself, too busy using that dreadful spear to attack a proctor, to attack a fat, bloated, spoiled child, one that cried and wailed for its father as the spear pierced his skin again and again, as the blood welled up and trickled across his corpulent flesh, tracing symbols that spoke of unending torture and never-ending glee before glimmering mercifully out of existence. Maul shot across the cavern, as quickly as possible, because the monster didn't see him. Not yet. But soon, his peripheral vision, his feral instincts, they were no longer enough to guide his path. Pulled from his trance, ripped from the hypnotic state of demolition that he had allowed his mind to descend into, he looked up just in time to see a colossal stone, the foundation of a mighty building, crashing down into his path. He stopped short, and not a moment too soon. He stopped short just in time to avoid being crushed, to avoid being shattered, being decimated by that falling boulder, the one that sent up a cloud of dust and filth, one that hung heavy in the air, that flooded into Maul's lungs and made him cough so hard that the world spun around him. When the world stopped spinning, when the cloud before his eyes cleared, he opened his eyes and he gasped. As the monster, that abyssal beast, stood before him. Perhaps you are a king. The beast, clutching the writhing proctor in one hand, brandished his dire spear proudly. But you, Maul stammered, his mind starting to splinter under the pressure, to crack and tear with the memories of all he'd seen, of all that he'd done. You can't. Before Maul could finish, the beast shot the spear out. He drove it forward. He buried it in Maul's chest, at the center of the 8-armed star, the one proudly painted in blue upon Maul's chest. But though the pain was intense, though it was excruciating, unbearable, Maul soon felt something even worse upon him. That horrible rictus grin. The rictus grin turned to a laugh, a horrible, massive laugh, one that emerged from betwixt those two white teeth, the ones that lengthened and sharpened as that grinning maw opened too wide, as the beast's jaw unhinged, as it stretched open, as the laugh surrounded Maul, as it became quivering flesh and weighed down upon him, as the sound exploded his eardrums and shook the shattered landscape of his psyche, as those gnarled, wicked antlers stretched down and grew around him, blocking out the sound, blocking out the light, blocking out everything but the shining jaws, but the rictus grin that opened up and devoured him. Maul awoke to a scream, a blood-curdling, fear-laden, cowardly scream, one that echoed in his ears, perplexing him, puzzling him, until he realized that his own mouth hung open and that the scream was his own. He would have been embarrassed, mortified, horrified to have emitted such a craven yelp, such a cowardly cry, but he could barely hear it himself, could only hear it because it echoed inside of his head. It reverberated throughout that shattered landscape which had already, once again, begun to tear itself apart. All other noise was drowned out, was consumed by the roars of the Titan, by the crackling of the growing flames all around him, and by the massive stones that rained down faster and faster from the cavern's crumbling roof. And even if Maul's scream could have been heard, there was no one around to hear it. The workers, the slaves, and the proctors had either escaped or, more likely, found their doom in the crushing grip and the grinding bite of the Titan, the one that even now, even amidst its impending doom, its unavoidable burial among solid stone, took joy in the destruction that it wrought. No, there was no one else around. There was no one else around at all, except for that crying, shaking proctor, the bloated, fat-faced child that lay at the savage king's feet, squirming to get away from the dreadful black spear that Maul held to his neck. Maul saw the craven filth's lips move, saw him plead and beg, but the roars were too great. Maul could hear nothing. So he removed the point of the spear, that black stone lined with pulsing red veins, and he reached down, dragging the proctor, that cowardly, arrogant procurer, to his feet before planting his spear against the boy's chest, applying just enough pressure so that he could feel that razor-sharp tip force its way, ever so slightly, into that quivering waste of flesh. But before Maul could press further, before he could look into the boy's tear-filled eyes as he finished the job, the child's plaintive cries cut through the din and reached Maul's ears. Please, please don't. I can get you whatever you want, anything you want. Maul had no idea how much time had passed. He had no idea how much time he had lost, but he knew that he didn't have much left. Time was of the essence. Time was the most crucial thing, the only commodity that he could never make more of, the one commodity that had been stolen from him time and time again. Patro had helped him this far. He had made all this possible. And if Maul wanted to complete his plan, the real plan, the only plan that mattered, he would have to follow Patro's order. He would have to obey Patro's commands. But what if he didn't? What if this cowardly boy, this craven child, this squirming, decadent proctor, this lazy, defiled procurer, what if he told the truth? What if he gave Maul another way to get what he required? The procurer looked around, panicked, eyeing the rampaging Titan that drew ever closer, the fires that threatened to consume the entire cavern, and the stones that crashed to the earth all around them. The ones that didn't even seem to faze the slack-jawed oaf holding him at spear point. Please, please, the procurer shouted. Trust me. Maul roared his response, screaming to be heard over the rising cacophony. How can I trust a man with no future? The procurer broke down in tears that rose into steam before they could even finish falling down his face. My father, he'll do whatever you want. He'll give you whatever you want. Please, save me. Maul pressed the spear point harder against the boy's chest, watching as a circle of thick, gooey wetness began to grow steadily upon the proctor's thick, black robes. Who's your father, and what could he possibly offer to one such as me? The boy gasped, never once thinking that this brute, this savage, the one that he had wished to save, to elevate, the one he had chosen, the boy had never thought, even for a moment, that the slave had no idea who he was, that the oaf could be ignorant of the procurer's identity, of his lineage. So he spoke, screaming, panicked, as he saw his time left on earth rapidly depleting before his very eyes. He's the king. He's Hanno. I am his son. And he can give you anything. Obviously, you're digging SKALD. So please, help The Only Story That Matters by reviewing the show on iTunes. If you leave a good one, I'll read it right here. Michael Blanton says this about SKALD. I listen to it while I work out. One of the most unique and dark stories I've ever heard. You won't get this anywhere else. SKALD is a must listen. SKALD is meant to transport you back in time, to a primeval forest where you sit around a crackling fire listening to a wandering bard weave his magics, to a royal court where you sit upon your throne, allowing a clever skald to regale you with an epic tale. Now, you can be just like that king, just like that jarl. You can go from being a fan of SKALD becoming a patron of The Only Story That Matters. Head to patreon.com/skald today to sign up and become not just another listener, but a crucial part of SKALD's weekly production. Please talk about SKALD on social media and make sure to tag me so I can share your posts. I'm Aubrey Sitterson on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and Snapchat. And I am shameless. I share all compliments and all positive reviews. You can also hit up aubreysitterson.com for links to everything, including SKALD, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, my comics work, bio, contact information, and more. Normally, I use this space to plug something I'm enjoying reading, watching, or listening to. But this week, I need to be selfish. I need to be shameless because this past Wednesday, April 27th, saw the release of Street Fighter G.I. Joe's 3rd issue, written entirely by me. There are no barbarians or weird gods or hateful magics, but the series features something almost as good. A ton of fighting between your favorite Street Fighter and G.I. Joe characters. Pick it up at your local comic shop or digitally using the link down in the description below. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.